Hello and welcome back to another episode of our Mega-lo-Mania remake in Unreal Engine. Now I was hoping to get some time to stream yesterday, but I did not, so here we are. Since the last stream I did do a little bit of work, continuing work on the research menu, so I'll start with going through that, and then we'll try and continue with the research menu functionality, see how far we can get with that. So one of the problems that I faced, or complications that I got to with the research menu, is particularly related to the timer. So as you can see, I've tidied up a few of the images, particularly these blue kind of headers. I've tidied up the organization of the text, and yes, the infinity overlaps with the other one now as well, and the approximate locations are about right. But the issue that we had was trying to set the timer frame to the appropriate position, and originally we did that using a data table and put all the appropriate numbers in there and had to convert the integer of the remaining value of time to the appropriate frame. What I've done instead is we still have our on tech icon click function and our set timer image, but in the set timer image I have defined a local variable for all of the frames that the timer will have. So it's got the 12 elements, and as you can see, they're all the different positions of the time, counting down or up, I suppose, depending on how you want to look at it. And that's an array of paper sprites. So when the function gets called, I'm given a number which corresponds to a position in that array, effectively. So I just get that frame, make the brush from that sprite, and set the brush on the icon timer. And that's called from the on tech icon clicked method, pretty much where it was before, just after we've set the appropriate remaining time text. We call this function. And the only other bits that I've done is I've created variables for each of the let me just clear that, don't want that. Anyway, created or use the variables that we've created for all of the different components here, and told a number of them become visible, so that in the designer I've set things like the multiply visibility is hidden by default. So what that looks like is we've got our root menu, that's pretty much as before. We go into our research, we don't have any of the artifacts of doing research until we actually click on something. And then we can see that the number of people is approximately okay, the infinity sign is approximately where it should be, but all the items appear, and we can change those. Now, in this current form, it's obviously showing the infinity because we don't have any people. To prove that the other bits and pieces work, we can just jump back over to our graph and make the remaining time visible, and make the infinity symbol not visible. And another thing that I've done is I went through and corrected a couple of the research times on the technologies, so they actually are kind of respective of what they look like in game when you first try and research them. The downside to that is that they all show complete clocks. When we actually play, they all start off as a complete clock. That's 50, that's 50, it's 25 and 100, and that's the numbers that you would get once you've actually allocated an individual man to the research. That's the time that you would see, and it would start counting down. So because that's actually multiples of 12, 100 in the 100 cycles actually works out at 1200 ticks, I guess, seconds perhaps. But we can just reduce this one down by 4. So we'll do a 96, and then we can just replay, so we can see that the frame of the top clock will be correct when we click number 2. We now have 99 cycles and a little bit less. So using the local variable, as we have done in set timer image, we're able to define all of the sprites that we wanted in a way that we can access within a graph, and very easily pick the right one that we want by use of the array and selecting that frame. So that I feel is very clean compared to where we were going before with the data table. That wasn't working very well. So this one works. A potential improvement that I think that I'll do moving forwards is taking this code, well, I think I have to do it actually, taking this code and creating a sprite blueprint for it. Now whether that may be, yeah, so it would be a sprite blueprint, a widget blueprint even, not a sprite blueprint, that's where I was getting confused. You can make blueprints from sprites, but I haven't really seen how that works yet or what benefits that has. But particularly with a widget, we can bundle all of the set, where is it? The set timer image, all of that can be within the widget's blueprint, much like we have with the tech icon, or the sprite image as we call it here, where we just have a simple function to set it. We can basically just extract this function from the research and put it into the timer. The advantage with that is that we would want to be able to reuse the timer in multiple places, so we'd definitely want to be able to reuse this functionality, reuse the local variables we defined. So now we have our selection process working. What we actually want to be able to do is allocate people to it. Now to do that, within the game, you left click or right click on either the person or the text, either one would work, to allocate or deallocate people. Now obviously we don't technically have people in our game at the moment. The player controller is probably where that information will be. That's not currently available, but we don't really need it to kind of get the core functionality done. So we're just going to focus on trying to get it to be functional, and then obviously separate that off into the right bits moving forwards. So the first thing that we're going to do is have the click event on our tech man, as we've called him. Now, one thing that I've noticed is that this is an image widget, which only allows on mouse button down. So if we create a binding to that, we'll just handle that to get rid of the warning. What we actually get is the geometry. That's probably just going to be about where the users clicked, location wise. We don't really care too much about that, because so long as they've clicked on the icon, that's all we really need. Secondly, the mouse event. That one is the one that we're going to need. How do we handle it? Pointer event. See what the mouse event has. Okay, oh, not mount. So we have a utility of pointer event with is mouse button down. So that's going to be our left and right click. So we'll need that again for our right click. That's the one I'm looking for. To remember the names that it uses for various things. So if it's a left mouse button, we want to increase the researchers, and if it's the right mouse button, we want to decrease. So here we'll just say print string increase and decrease. And actually, Yeah, so there's potentially you could, I don't know if they have middle mouse button. Yeah, they have middle mouse button. So that it is actually possible for it to be false here and false here, because they may have fourth, fifth, whatever other buttons. So that's okay. And then in both cases we just run on to the end. Let's just see if that functions correctly. So it doesn't appear that holding it down really does what we want it to do. Now obviously we want to begin the process of adding people when it's down, and we want to continue that until such time as they release the mouse button. And I'm concerned that perhaps the on mouse button down event isn't going to be good enough for that, because I think the button, while ugly, let's just drop him here, button has a few more events: clicked, pressed, released. Yeah, so I'm not sure if we've got enough control over our actual image and the event that we've got. Techman icon, this one, yep. To actually be able to achieve what we want. We want to hold to increase, and we want to release to stop in both left and mouse button cases. And effectively, when we run this, we get the text when we click down on it, but that's it, and it disappears. There's no, it's not happening again. I should be able to see it in this graph. Doesn't seem like this graph is showing what we've it handles both mouse clicks, but it doesn't seem to reoccur. Now if we don't know when they release it, then we can't even do it on any kind of timer. So I think we're going to have to make this more of a button. Now, as far as I can tell, a button is just a container, and therefore inside the button we can add our tech man, or the alternative is to add our button. Oh, not to that one. Where's our tech man? There we go. Put the button there, put the tech man in it. There we go. And we want the button. The button's about positioned correctly. The tech man has the padding, which is not what we wanted. So we'll have to sort that out in a minute, but we should be able to take the background off the that works. Can we just not have a background? I don't think so. Maybe just making it a transparent background is all we need. Yep, okay, so that's fine. Did we not just set it to transparent? Yes. Okay, so his position's a bit off, but we've added padding onto the top and left of the man to try and position him correctly when he was outside of the button. So we'll just remove that. Try and get the button to position itself in a way that puts the little man over the little man. So it might require some tinkering with the buttons to make him position. We won't worry about the fact that he's not quite in perfectly the right position right now. We'll focus more on the actual interaction. So the fact that we've called we need to reference the image, because the image is the bit that changes depending on the technology. So when the research menu is open, we need to select the right tech based on the player's tech level. So we need access to him, but we also need access to the button. Now the button has much more events going on, whether you're over it, hovered, unhovered, whenever you've pressed, released, or clicked. So click would be a on-off kind of thing, or the way you'd use the mouse is down and up, and then it would occur. So we'll just drop this in here, print a string, call it clicked. the mouse down or mouse on pressed, and then finally release. So we'll just get a feel for how these events occur from our button. Yeah, so there's still the event happening from the tech man, so we'll just get rid of him. So we can just, in here, drop down, remove binding. The function that it was bound to still stays, so we'll have to jump over here and delete that as well, because we know we don't need that. Let's see how it works now. So if we click on him, we get a click, pressed and released. If we click and hold, we get pressed, then we get released, and then we get the clicked event. So that's going to work well for what we need. So in this case, it's rather than creating a function for those events, it's actually, so rather than creating a function for those bindings, these is actually created these events. We haven't named the button either, so we'll just get rid of those so we can name the button. One thing that would be nice, I think, would be putting that text with the button. So let's just see if we can do that with a vertical box. No. Okay. No. So you can't put two things in one button. If we try, it just goes next to it. So the button basically just contains that single thing. Now, I guess then you can't put... Okay. Okay, we can do it. If you do it in the right order, you can actually put it together. So we put the button down, then a vertical box in it, then the two things that we need. Let's see if that actually works then with the clicking as we've had before. So we'll select, ignoring the fact that it's completely messed up the style, we've now got those two things in the same area. We've got a little bit of an awkward click happening. Must be something to do with the fact that the button down is slightly different, but we'll only tie up the clicked event just to see if this works, even though we unfortunately just removed them. Yeah, so that seems to work. The layout is a bit worse. I think to actually get it to align correctly, we'd have to do similar with the clock. That would have to be a vertical box as well, and yeah, I'm not sure if that would work, kind of getting everything to align correctly. But within the original game, you are able to click and hold onto the text or the man, and it would increase or decrease accordingly. So we kind of really want it to work with both of those, just for convenience as well, because it makes it look a bit scruffy. We'll put everything back where it was, hopefully. We'll just try undo instead. There we go. I think probably the thing that was actually making it scruffy was that there is an offset, an anchoring for the researcher's block, and that was causing it to be all misaligned when it's put into a different container. As I say, that's something that we can try and work on later. Whether it's better to have two buttons and two sets of events, kind of keeping them separate, or whether it's better to put them all into one button, I'm not sure. I don't think it matters a great deal, because when we handle that event, we're just going to call a function anyway, because it's possible to increase and decrease the researchers from within the research menu and from the parent menu as well. So we've got to take that into account when we're actually trying to get the full functionality in place. So change our button to so the game actually calls them designers, so we'll call them designers too. And we only care about the pressed and the released. So because an event isn't fired while it's pressed, what we actually have to do is fire an event at a certain interval while it's pressed, and then cancel that event when it's not. So should be able to get some kind of timer. So allocating and deallocating the researchers probably again needs to be done at the player controller level moving forwards, because the player controller knows what the player can and can't research, and the player controller knows whether they actually have researchers or designers available, or basically free people available to do stuff. Not sure if you want clear timer or... wonder if that's even going to work. Probably want to have it as a local variable instead. Because I would expect that by the time this code works, whatever return from that exists doesn't exist anymore. So we want to be able to kind of propagate this event to the player controller to handle. Whether we do that immediately or not, I'm not sure. Yeah, so from this context, we're really just kind of wanting to tell the player controller to start allocating researchers, designers. We also need to know what mouse button is. So we need something to tell us the mouse button. See if this works. Oh, we don't have a... Just trying to make it up as I go along here. Trying to see if from the player controller we can get anything about the mouse event. I'm sure there is something. So just have to have a quick look. Works fine when you've got the on mouse button down, but this is the on pressed. This does not seem to... It's not obvious how to get the mouse button. You'd have thought it would be fairly straightforward to get the mouse button of a on pressed event. So I think that would actually trigger the event dispatcher, which is good for what we want to do later. But we still don't know which button we've pressed. Because it works well when we... I think I'm going to have to come back to the left and right mouse button thing. It's clearly not immediately obvious what's going on there. But we'll have on and so at this point we've got two events, end allocate and if that's any different. Yeah, start allocate and end allocate. Now once we've got the left and right mouse button working, whether we want to have one event that has both the left and the right, so rather than start allocating or deallocating, it would just be something to do with the designers, or whether we'd want to actually have multiple events to differentiate the allocation or deallocation. Again, I'm not sure at this point which one makes most sense, which one's going to be cleaner. But what's it complaining about? That's awkward because I don't know. So I don't know what the difference between a sign is here. But we know we would actually just want to call it in both these cases anyway. And now, now we've got that, we'll go back to our player controller, which we really haven't done much with so far. These windows together. Now our player controller doesn't know that the user is in the research menu even at the moment. The player controller doesn't know that this widget exists, and yet it's going to want to bind to these events. That's probably the wrong way round. Because the player controller exists all the time, it would be much better, I think, if somehow the research menu did something particular with the player controller. So I think I did create one, yeah. Don't know. What we're trying to avoid is tying them together perhaps in the wrong way. We know that the research menu can get access to the player controller. The research menu then can call, should be able to call that event. Maybe if we had them in two different windows. Let's find out what it can do with it. Ooh. It can call the event. That's where the issue was, why I couldn't find it in the first place. Probably don't want to do the casting all the time, not if we're going to do this often, but for now we'll leave it. What would probably be better is to have a local variable, member variable for the player controller, so we only have to cast it once rather than every time the user interacts with it. So over here we'll call this one the start allocate sinus end allocate sinus. Keeps doing that. Yeah, I think actually what we'll do is we'll take that and as part of this bit awkward because all of this is in the way. Just drop that in the middle, and then from the return, what we'll just do promote to variable, and new variable 1 will be our player controller. Don't need that one. So now when we actually click something, we don't have to do the cast. Makes this bit a little bit cleaner. So the player controller can go to there. So, why does it say error? So, cannot find event dispatcher named in the player controller. I'll compile that, then compile that. That's better. Okay, simple enough. So now within the player controller, we want to handle that event. And handle that event. Not sure why assign does that. Okay, nonetheless. So when we start allocating them, we just want to call the we want to put this in its own graph, really. So we can graphs new graph. Just call it designers. Take those out because we can't have them in here twice. Oops. Event and event. So now we're handling both those. Again, we're just gonna print a string to make sure all this is tied up correctly. See if it's actually going to do what we want it to do. So when we click the man, we should see start. We don't really see anything at all. He does bounce still, annoyingly. Okay, so why have we got errors? Check the casting is working correctly. Oh, of course. We added the set. We didn't call the set. To get used to some of the things that just kind of work, and other ones you actually have to add to the call chain. So that is what we were missing. And so when it was trying to do this, the player control was null, so it was just not working. So now it should work correctly. Okay, still no. But do we have errors? Don't have any errors, but it still doesn't work. So it says variable is not in scope in there. Why is it not in scope? Variable is not in scope. Wonder if, I don't think that having that as the pre-construct or the construct would make any difference, but we'll just tie those up like that. Nope, still says variable is not in scope. So oddly enough, with that player controller we can handle the events within here, which we'll need to anyway. Why is it not in scope? I assumed that these variables were available throughout the entire and the player controller has a current value there, but then has player controller object reference variable not in scope error. Well, it's not even an error, is it? Call start allocate designers. Let's just check that that's correct in the player controller. Maybe we need to bind this. Don't know if it's going to like that. That was it. So we had to bind it. I guess that does make some sense. Anything that wants to handle an event has to be bound to it. That should give us our 2 events that we want. Yep. Still don't like the fact that stupid character bounces, but we'll deal with that another time. Okay, so when we actually start allocating people, we need to know how many people we have, and then what to do with them. So as our player controller, we are going to say we need population. I'll do as a simple name for it. Say it is editable. That should be fine. I'll give it a default value of 100. So that's where we start with the game. So when the player starts allocating designers, still not confident I've got all the events going to be tied up in the right place, but the player controller needs to do a timer, because every tick or every amount of time we need to add people. Whether there's people to add or not to add, it's not really up to this scope to figure out. It could, in theory, say if you've got no people left, then don't call this, but since the population will be able to grow during the gameplay, if we determine that we shouldn't start the timer because we don't have enough people, and then the population goes up, we won't be able to handle that. So if they're pressing down on that, increasing the population, we always want to run this timer event. And I think it's just that one. Yep. And for that timer, we need to make sure we remember it. So this will be the designer allocation timer, because when we release it, we want to stop the timer. Cancel the timer, I think it was. Clear timer. And the handle is that. So now we're going to say we want it to be quick, but not too quick. We'll start with something easy so we don't overwhelm ourselves with it. We'll do every second. Again, we'll just leave the print standard because we just want to see that that works. So we're seeing the hello appear. That because it takes them a second to appear, they're actually removing it as well. And if we let go, they should all disappear. So we know that the click process now works correctly. and we know that we have to do something with that. One thing that we should check is that the user is actually starting to research a particular thing. The player controller doesn't know if they've selected a technology yet, but that would probably be more up to the research menu to handle, so we'll leave it there for now. This custom event will be allocate designers. So we want to know that, so available population will probably be a slightly better name for this, because it's not, or unallocated population. Now we want to know if that is greater than 1, because you always have to have that last one remaining person to allocate designers. If it is greater than 1, then depending on how long the user's been clicking down, we want to increase how many people we add, or perhaps increase the time in the time space. So there's multiple ways that we can speed up the process of long clicks. Quite often these kind of things, when you first click on them, they're like 1 every half a second, 1 every second, and then they start going up by 5s, maybe a little bit quicker, that kind of process. For now, we're just going to add 1 person to the designers for each cycle that happens, and we are going to slow it down to half a second, and probably slower still. So how we can this has categories. Oh, well, maybe we can do it here. Do it like this then. So we have unallocated people. We also have designers. We'll have we're trying to have designers. Okay. Bit annoying. Can't have designers. Designers pop. Count. Bit ugly, but since we can't have designers, that'll work. And actually, that's a bit better. Actually, we won't. Increment is fine if we ever always want to add 1. But we probably don't want to add just 1 all the time. So that increments our designers every time that cycles round. Now all we need is to bind the research menu's designer count so we can bind it to the designer's allocation timer. Wonder how that would work. That seems like it would be nice almost to update this value automatically, but it's not a problem. So we're binding it to a function at the moment. Get researchers text. And player controller. Designers. Get designers count. And pass that in there. So it has to do the conversion from an integer to some text. That's okay. Let's see if this works then. Oh, we need some to show it. Not a lot's happening. Maybe we need a way of knowing whether that process is working. So we'll print the string, print out our design account after we've incremented it, and see if that shows up anything. So again, we have to click a research thing to get the number shown. So it's definitely going up, but that would mean that the research menu get researchers text isn't working. Got a player controller. Oops. Current value is 0. Let's just play it through a little bit so we can get some people allocated. So now it's 5. Add a breakpoint. Okay, so it doesn't seem to get the text after the initial display, even though it seems to call it like a million times. Still not 5 anyway. Should be a number. Current value is 7. 7 equals, yeah, so it says it's got 7 there, but not quite sure why this function doesn't seem to work. Go straight from number to integer to string. No idea if that conversion's better, but at least then we know we're using the same data. Okay, so that's okay. It's not ideal. Yeah, so it looks like when we start the widget, it calls it a lot, and then it stops. Perhaps when it's actually displayed, it stopped, even though it's not even right anyway. It's right here, but then when we actually display it, it displays 0. So that's just not working. If we have it blank, does that make any difference? So we get the right number, but it still shows 0, 0. Maybe because I didn't compile it. It shouldn't even be displaying 0, 0 now, but it clearly is. Okay, that's not working. What else can we do? We can... there's a fairly good chance that when the player changes their designers, when any of these values change at any point, the screens need to update. So see what we've got here. So we can bind to the start and end, which obviously we don't want to do. Don't think there was anything in the... Yeah, so we can handle the start and the end, but that's just going to set that timer. So let's get a new event. So, actually I don't think we'll do that. So, what we're going to do is we've created this new event. Basically, when the population changes, in this case the designers, we're going to call this event. Now we may need more granularity later on. It may matter what has changed, but we're just going to go for a bit more of a generic event at the moment and just say if the population has changed, then we need to do something. Which has just reminded me that we add one here for the designers, but we don't take it away from the unallocated. So we want to get the unallocated. Now we want to do the take it out before we put it in part, so that we don't accidentally end up with more people than we should. So minus, and we'll have another. Yeah, so this is just in the graph, isn't it? Yeah, so we will probably want to put this in a function later, so we can have a local variable. Even though we will actually want to be able to increase this over time, but put that in there. Can't make it constant or anything, can't make it unchangeable, but that's fine. So we just want to make sure that what we're taking out is what we're adding. Again, if we don't do that, there's a big chance that later on we'll have issues because we do that, because we didn't do that. So set, join them up. So now we make sure that we deduct the population we're using before we add it to the designers. And again, we'll probably functionize this kind of stuff later on, but that will do. And then we call the event. And what I was going to do was, for the event, we're just going to say this is our unallocated people, this is our designer. But if it's a generic event, we'd have to list all the different types of population that we can have. Because you can have designers, you can have miners, and you can have construction workers in the factory. I think actually that may be all that we have, or builders for building the factory or the mines and stuff. So there's 4 different types. Now in theory we could have an event for each, or we could have one event that tells you all the numbers, but I think actually it might be better to simply provide the player controller. That one. Oops. So we want a object reference, pass by reference, get a reference to self, pass that in. So we call the event with ourself. That's cannot pass a read-only variable to a reference parameter. Really? I guess it's an object reference by reference. Didn't make any sense to it. Okay, that's fine. That doesn't make much of a difference from here because we've got the player controller already, and we're obviously going to want to bind to that event. So we arrange the windows a little bit so we can drag that from here, and we'll bind. So again, because this didn't actually be the problem, we'll just remove this, put this back in the pre-construct so everything's done at the same time. Once we've set the player controller, I'm gonna have to fix this, put that in a function. I think we'll get back to it in a minute. And just do it in line for the time being. And we want to set the researchers, as we've called them. So I think we'll change that again, just so that we're using the same technology. This will actually be allocated designers. And then our allocated designers text box, we will get, and then we'll set text. Get designers count. Let's see if that works. Why does that not work? Oh, yep, that one. So I'll ignore that spam. Yes, excellent. So that's working. It's really slow. And also, actually single clicking on it doesn't work because that probably starts and stops the timer so fast that it doesn't actually occur. We could either deal with that by always adding that one person straight away, or just making sure the timer occurs just once. I think making sure the timer would occur just once would be a bit awkward, but making sure that this code basically occurs immediately after setting the timer would ensure that they would be able to kind of single click on it to add one or remove one. Okay, let's run that again. Where are we? So we need to get rid of the spam. Actually, that's what we did see. Question is, where was that? Player controller. No, it was in the research menus. Get research menu text call. So need to remove that binding. Set that text back to 0, 0. And we can remove get researchers text function. So one thing that would be nice would be if our text here had prefix, so that it was always 2 numbers long. So we've got our designers count here, which will convert into a string. Number of characters. The left pad was right, but we can't pad it with a specific character. So we're just going to get space. That's not going to be quite what we want, is it? No. Seems a bit of a flaw there. You can pad it with a certain amount of characters, but it's only padding it with white space, I guess. There we go. Hidden away, when you convert an integer to text, which is what we were doing originally anyway, you can make it padded, I think. See if that is what we want it to be. Yeah, there we go. Hidden away perhaps, but it works perfectly doing that mechanism. Okay, so I guess that's it. We got our researchers. Let's speed it up. And yeah, it seems to stop kind of as soon as we let go. So no problems there. Let's get all the way. Yep, so we can't get to over 100. So we need to add the number onto how many people we've got left, and we need to remember that we're doing research. So the research has to be handled outside again of the menu. The menu really just has to show what we're doing, not be in control of doing it as such. It needs to be in control of starting or stopping it, in our case starting the research, but it's not actually going to do the counting down of the research. So I think one thing that we can do, and the reason we kind of have to have that mechanism in place, is in the actual game. Starts. So we can start a research, we can leave, and we can allocate from outside of it. And we can go back in and we can see that that's the research that we want to start. Obviously at the moment, when we come out of our menu, it completely forgets what we'd clicked on. So we need to actually remember which research we're going to do. So we need the events to start and stop the allocation. Just thinking with all the events that we have, and we've already got a reference to the player controller that we're going to need anyway, perhaps the starting and the stopping of allocating people shouldn't be an event on the player controller, and instead we should just call a function, which is almost what we're doing anyway. We're just doing it kind of as an event. Not really sure. Not sure. I think this one works doing it this way because the player controller is telling us to do something. This one I'm not quite so sure of because it's not really the player controller that's in charge. We are, from within this menu, calling the player controller's event, and I don't particularly like that. Tend to be when I use events in other cases, we don't call the events from outside of the person that owns the event. But nonetheless, we'll still go with it. So whichever way round we do it, the same process needs to occur. We'll delete these for now because we're not actually using them. When the user selects an event, selects a research over here, we need to know that they've clicked on that, and we need to do more than just on tech icon clicked, which is what we're doing now. Let's type the infinity item and break that. So this is what we do when the player clicks on a bit of research, and this is just kind of visually setting it up. Now, I can't think of a scenario where this wouldn't work. We're kind of saying that if the research is available in that list, then the player can click on it. The research would only become unavailable on that list if the player has finished the research of it. I don't think actually that's strictly true. I think research becomes available when the user has the resources to make whatever it is they want to research. So if, for example, the player used all the resources required to make something, then that thing would disappear. But I think we've got to handle unlocking and I guess locking or hiding available research at some point moving forwards. But for now, again, we'll just work on this area. So the user's clicked on some particular tech. Outside of this function, we completely forget. Okay, that's why it kept going set to 0, 0. Not doing that would probably have solved the binding problem. Not sure if the binding is cleaner than what we've got now anyway, but we'll just give that a go. So we had in the designer, we bound that to a new binding, and in the event graph we did that. So we'll just break that. complain. Yeah, let's break it there instead. So effectively it's exactly the same process, we're just doing it within the get text binding. Oh, we don't need to set text, do we? Because we're already in here. Let's see if that actually works then. Yeah, that works. That was where our problem was. We were actually setting the text to 0, 0. Let's just make sure that works by going over here and not binding that. Check it again. Yeah, I think that's probably a little bit cleaner rather than excuse me, rather than having to bind to this event to do the text update. We're just tying the text box into it, and we'll call that update allocated designers. Maybe it is. Yeah, we'll leave it as that. No. I think its default name might have been a bit better, just because of what it is and how it works, but that will definitely do for now. Okay, so when we click on a given available research, we go into item tech item clicked, on tech item clicked, and effectively we display all the bits and pieces that we have to do, find the technology, make sure that it's exists, display all the pieces. A bit haphazardly dropped in there, so we'll just move these over as we. So I don't think we need to set the text because it is set to 0, 0 in the default value, so that stuff we don't need. So we make sure the table exists, then we make everything visible. Perhaps we should do that later, but then we set up all the other bits and pieces, set the appropriate text and stuff, and that's it. I think, yes, we'll actually take that out and do it last. Once everything's been set up, we'll make it visible. Make sure that hasn't broken anything. Okay, so once the user's actually clicked on it, we need to tell probably the player controller again that we want to do some research. Even though we haven't allocated any designers to it, we want to be able to yes, so just thinking of the next bit, but we've got the player control here actually. So start allocating designers, end allocating designers. We're just going to call this the changed event because it only takes a player controller. It's got no relevance to population or anything. We're just saying something's changed. It's up to you to figure out what it is. In the case of the research, yeah, so we've got another scenario here. The the user's clicked on some research, so we're going to have select available design. And again, we have to bind and add a custom event, and that's on selected design. Yep. So when a design is selected, we need to know what design it is. So it's going to have to be a name. We need to promote that to a variable, and we'll set that as current design. And over here we want to call on selected design. See this spelling error in there. I'll get back to that in a moment. Over here. What have we done there? On selected design. We're actually calling that event here rather than... Yeah, I'm not sure that's quite the same way. Over here on the event graph, we're actually doing it as a call delegate. We're actually doing an event, whereas over here, wherever that other bit of code was, I think we're just calling the function directly, which I don't think is necessarily as good. I bet it will work though. I'm not really sure what the difference is. Aside from this one's just kind of comes straight in here and doesn't need the binding. That's kind of the problem that I can see at the moment. We've got an instance of the player controller, and yet we're kind of trying to do events. Yeah, it seems by default it doesn't. No, it does. They are there. So we can call the function, or we can just call the event. Anyway, so we'll do it the same way as we've done all the rest for the time being. Sure, we'll figure out whether it's right or wrongly done when we run into an issue. We don't need to play because we can't see anything happen. So now over here we've set the current design, and the current design is named whatever it is they've selected, and I think that's about it here. We don't actually want to progress the design process. The player controller is not actually going to do the designing process. That would be handled more by the game state, or maybe even a level just somewhere else, potentially anyway. Kind of makes sense to a point, but then again the user needs to know the progress. Yeah, somewhere we need to store that it's being designed and how long it's going to take left. Okay, so let's get that reflected over here first. I guess that's the thing though, isn't it? What we were actually doing here is when the user selects this, we're immediately displaying it here. even though now we've got all that event in place to tell us what we want to display. Yeah, okay. So this function displays the appropriate thing. Now we know that when we click on something, the player controller now knows what that is. We can jump over here, add a breakpoint there, just confirm that's true. Yep, so we come into this function, we resume, and we can see that we're going to research shield 1, so on and so forth. That's fine, but there's no reflection of that anywhere else, and when we go out and in again, we've lost it. So we need to actually, on the research menu's initialization process over here, the pre-construct, or probably the event construct, it doesn't really matter which, we need to get, if any, current researchers going on and display the right thing. We have the player controller and we can get the current research or current design, and that gives us a name, but we can't call our onTechItemClicked function, not because it's not going to show everything correctly, because all of that part is perfect for what we need. What's not perfect is that part. We don't want to call the event again. We can, it's not going to cause us a problem necessarily, but it's a bit ugly. I guess even though it is a bit ugly, it is going to work. Except we need the technology. Why do we need that? That's because yeah, we don't need the technology because we know it's a technology, but we needed that because the icon needed it. Is it data? I'm not sure I see why I did it that way. That seems to just be a bit confusing. If we go to our root screen and our UI sprite image, where did we go? Oh, over here. Graph. But then I'm trying to figure out is, why do we need the type? And we need the type because we get the data from the table, but if we didn't get the data from the table here, okay, we needed the data from the table. No, I'm not quite sure why I did it that way. It doesn't, if it didn't call set data, I didn't call just set sprite. I think actually the way that I went with it was that I originally thought we could just get away with calling set data, doing all the breaking of the object in there, and that would be fine. But we need the and we wouldn't need the technology here, but we do need the technology here because we use all the other bits and pieces of it. The research time specifically. I think the end result of that is going to be the same. Yeah. It works a bit better. We don't need the set data. It doesn't help us. And that also means it's just a little bit clearer. So within our event graph, onTechItemClicked, we don't need the type. don't use the technology here, so we'll remove that. Was it needed at this end? Where are we here? Yeah, so again, I think we're iterating over all of the technologies, and we're creating the appropriate sprite image widget, and then we're setting data rather than using the item that we've got, rather than getting the data table rows. I guess there was an element of maybe that's nicer, but yeah, I don't think I like that anyway. Oops. Because we have the name of the thing that we want. We break it anyway over here. Why did we break it? Oh, we break it to put it in the right column. Yeah, so it's kind of like we were using set data to try not to break the technology in multiple places, but we have to break it for the other data anyway, so it doesn't really save us anything. We just need to do this sooner. That one. So then we want to create the sprite. We won't call set data, we'll call set sprite. Sprite will be that one. Make sure everything's tied up as it should be. So the category goes into the selection, the sprite goes into the sprite. Let's see if that works. Nope. What's gone wrong? So we bind that event. Nope. tied that up yet. Just make sure we're getting there correctly. Yep. And the things are showing up, but the event binding doesn't seem to be working. I mean, obviously one thing that would help not having to get it from the data table every time would be actually storing the technology in the icon. Did say we could perhaps specialize the icon moving forward to do that. The binding works, the click works. We did move stuff around a bit though, didn't we? So get data table row. Maybe that's a bit that's not working then. Let's try again. Binding works, we don't need that. Click on something. Our row name is none. Our tech icon is none. Okay. Ah, I remember now. We needed a way. We needed a way for the image to set its type name. That's what set data does. It sets a type name. Because the image needs to know what it's actually representing. All it knows at the moment is which sprite it's showing. It's annoying. Perhaps should have made some notes on that. Okay, so the sprite image needs its name set. But it doesn't need to do any of that. So I'm going to say we'll still do both. So do it like that instead. One tech item clicked. It's fine because that passes the event. What we want is the event over here. Set sprite. Oh no, we need to compile that. Ah, we weren't doing set data. Yep. So that function call set data instead. In the sprite and the name. We could, in theory, have set data have the width and height, I think, as well. I think that would make sense. Set those to 16 like we had before, because that's the general width and height that we want those to be. Now we have a row name and everything works correctly. So one thing that we are actually doing here is when we click on a piece of research, we're getting how long it takes from the table, the data table. One thing that I'm not sure of is, I can't believe we're actually still in this game. So a stone, as per our data and as per the game data, if we allocate one person to it, it takes 25 full circles, minus the one that we've kind of done, perhaps. So speed it up. If we go halfway around 24, and we take that one person off and put that one person back on, it actually continues from where it left off. So if we go all the way around to finish that, so we go to 23 cycles, and then select something else, that starts at 50 or 49. If we go back to the stone and put one person on, we lose that progress. So long as you don't change the research, the progress is maintained. Slow it back down again so it stops us losing. But that means that we're okay doing it how we are. Clicking a research we're currently doing, that shouldn't change anything. So as per evident, if we just speed that up, so we get some progress. If we select it again, nothing happens. So we want to make sure that that's true too. But for now, we do all of this stuff when we click on something. So when we construct this widget, we want to set it to any current design. We don't need to check if the current design is good or not, because the first thing we're going to do is try and get the row technology, or the data table row for that technology. If that name is none, we're just going to go down the not found path, and we don't do anything in there anyway. So now when we start, we should be able to go into the research, select the shield, out of the research and back in again, and the shield is still selected. Do the rock. That's all good. And the next thing is we want to set the text to our allocated designers, again at the start, based on, in our event graph, based on how many designers are currently working. So don't much like the name of that function now. It's more of a it's not, this name implies an event is occurred, yet we're reusing that event to show the right tech, so we'll have to deal with that again, just kind of clean things up. But somewhere in this chain of events, so this bit here is all about displaying the available technologies. Now, as we've kind of briefly mentioned before, technologies can become available or unavailable during the course of the gameplay, and it may happen while the user's actually on the screen. So we'll have to account for that. We could account for that by just simply redrawing or rerunning this code and making sure the technology is available to the player, which we're currently not doing anyway. At this point, we're literally just displaying all the available technologies that are available in that data table, which is not going to be correct in all cases. But at the moment, we want all of that stuff to happen in one go. So we'll put all that into a function, and that function will be called render available technologies, and we call that straight away. So that doesn't change anything, but it just means that we don't have all that code lying around here. So the designers will display as they are. So maybe I thought that we had to reset the designers, but because the designers are bound, if we set that to 20, come out and go in, it's still 20. So that's quite good. If we change the research, we need to reset that amount of those people. Okay, so that's a bit of a complication. So how do we want to deal with this? If we change the research, we need to remove all the available designers. The player controller can do that. This is, if we select one here, we can go so we're saying if the current design, or if the new design that the user selected is not equal to the current design, then we want to set the designer count to 0. We also want to make sure they become unallocated. And again, we don't. If we did set the unallocated before we set the designers, there's a moment where the user has twice as many people, which isn't particularly great. So ideally, we'd want to change them in a way that doesn't give the user more people, even if for only a second. We want to remove the designers and then add those same amounts on here. I think what we'll do is add a function. See if this works. And a local variable. So we set it. Yep. And okay, so this should, in a function, so we've got this local variable called count, reallocate population. We pass it two integers by reference, and we set integers by reference so that it knows that it's working on those two things. We set the local variable to how many we're taking from. We need that because we can pass that into there. I'm quite sure why deleting that deletes both of them, but not a problem. Let's just tie it all back up again. Try and arrange them so we can see what's going on a bit easier. I don't think that's true actually. Put it all straight. So we set the local variable to what we're coming from, and then we set the from to 0. Then we set the to the result of count, and then we have transitioned that population from one number to another without having at any point more people. I mean, you could, the primary reason doing that is if for some reason it rendered the screen in between that transition, the user would see that they had 100 unallocated people and 99 researchers, and then for a split second see that they actually had lots of people, which we don't want. So that should be fine. And we could actually use that same function to here, which is why I thought perhaps we needed the third value. I'm thinking maybe the third value would be a bit of an awkward call, so we'll call our function reallocate population. So if our selected research is not the same as our current research, we want to reallocate our designers from our designers to our unallocated people. But in either case we want to set that, so I think we'll just, I guess we'll have to do it there actually, so that we can tie it to true and false. So regardless of what happens at the branch, whether it's the same or not the same, we can set it. It's not equal. Well, I guess to be fair, we don't actually need to do that because we're just going to be setting it to the same thing. We reallocate the population, we set that. So that should mean that if we go here, we allocate some people. Oh dear. Our allocation is broken. When did that happen? Maybe the allocation's working again. We've just lost the ability to see it. Why is it not showing our design account? So we do have a design account of 13. We do clear it when we change something. We don't. Doesn't seem to work now though. why once we've selected a research are we unable to allocate our people? Maybe because we're screwing up the population. Maybe our code here didn't work. Ah, yeah, of course. We set the from to 0, which is fine. We want to take all of the from and put them on the 2, but we don't want to set the 2 to it. So when we first call this function where design is a 0, we set the design as the 0. What we actually want to do is add integer, that one there. We don't want to set at all. Oh, we do actually. It's probably cleaner if we do it that way around. Our in by reference value of 2, so that would be our unallocated population in this context. We want to add to it our reallocated population and then set. And we can get rid of the strings now because I'm confident that that's the problem. It's just a matter of accidentally clearing our available population. Not so great. So there's a little bit of an awkwardness there, whereas when it goes into a breakpoint we never get our depressed event, but that shouldn't ever happen during gameplay. So there we go, our allocation works fine now, and changing it does. We should be able to allocate here, exit and enter. Okay, so when we enter it, we are displaying in our sprite image. We are displaying the research by calling the onTech icon clicked, and we are setting the text of how long it's going to take to the total time, maximum time that it's going to take. Now, if we're reusing this function as we currently are within the initialization process, the player may have actually done research on that item already, and simply rendering it with the total research isn't going to work, and that's why we potentially need to involve the player controller more in this process of displaying the available research. We don't want to get the available research from the data table directly. We actually want to get the current research from the player controller all the time, and equally alongside that, how much time is left on that current research. So the player controller knows what they're doing. They also know how many people they're doing it with. So they're doing a current design research with an amount of researchers. What we don't know is how long is it going to take to finish, and how much progress has been made on that thing. And as I say, the actual progress part of it is likely to be done elsewhere, because we don't want the player controller to actually be in control of game events as such, but the player controller should hold how long it's going to take, because it's really down to the individual player's state. We don't want the game controller to have to store the information again. So we're going to have a variable that is an integer, and it will be current design remaining time. Now there's a element of perhaps these two variables are so similar we should have some kind of structure to store them. I don't think we can create structures kind of on the fly. We'd have to pre-create the structure within the blueprint scope to hold that. That kind of, it would work, but it may not be the cleanest way. I mean, there's only going to be two variables that we need for the current design. Whether it makes sense to join them together or not remains to be seen. So at this point, the user selected the current design. We determine if the current design is different, and if it's different, we reallocate the population to make sure that they've not got any current designers on it, and we set the current design. We don't set the current design if they are not different, if they are the same. There's not any reason not to necessarily, but we don't, which means we can carry on from this branch. So we've set the current design, we know that's set in stone. Now we need to get data table row for it, but we could do this earlier on to make sure that what design we've been given is actually a valid design. So we'll actually do that before we do the check. That way, if we've been given a bad technology name, like somehow this event's been called with something completely different, we don't actually do anything. We could put out an error. I think it's the log. Because we don't want to print any string to the screen, but it might be worth printing out some logging information. I'll deal with that another time. So, break the technology. Now, because what I don't know is what happens if we set it. Quick little experiment here. Yeah, so we can't change that number when we get it, but set it, print its value. What I'm trying to figure out is, can we store that structure? Can we modify that structure? It's not great because we still don't have the name, but there may be maybe other information that we need either now or moving forward that is useful for the current design. We could look it up every time, but holding the object may actually be a bit cleaner. that pin to be a input. So what we've done here is we've selected a technology straight away. We get the data table row, and if we find it, we set this local variable to the technology structure local variable. And for informational purposes, we print out the string that says the current design time for that structure that we've just set. It's not going to quite work, is it? Might have to rearrange this. And yeah, so we only want to do that afterwards. So we can see this if this works correctly. Now, we know that it's going to be 300 when we set it first anyway, so over here, after we set back up there, don't need to print the string. Split that. Get this all right. Okay, so that's better. If the current technology that if the selected technology is not the same as the current design under the true branch, then we reallocate the population. We also set the current design to be the new design structure. We change the research time to 12, and then we set the current design name just here, this variable. If it is the same, so if the user's clicked on the same one, for our information, let's find out what the current research time is for that research. The reason being, if we now select number 1, it should be 12. Unfortunately, we don't output that information except in this print. So now if we select number 1 again, we see that it's 12. That means we've changed that value in that structure, and we'll just do a print here of that value. So we print it before we change it, just so that we can see it's working correctly. So if we select number 1, 600, select number 1 again, it's 12, select the stick, 600, select it again, it's 12. Back to that. So we can see that every time we get the table row, we get it as it was. We're not changing the table data, we're changing our local copy of it, which is good. It's kind of how I hoped it was going to be. That way, we can actually hold that structure as our current research. Now, the awkward thing about the structure is that the name is not part of it, despite the fact that it comes from the data table. The index column, the name column as it is not part of the structure itself, and therefore we've got to store the current design and the current design name separately. That was actually a bit of a tangent because we still only need the current design and the remaining time, but we do need the table row to set the remaining time to start with. So we'll clean all this up, and we will, for the time being, get rid of that, because it's much cleaner just to hold the current design and the current design remaining time. But we still need the data table row, because we need to set the current time to that. So we'll set those two values immediately. If we selected the same one, which is this branch, we don't do anything, we don't change anything. So now there should be no output, no change, no visual indication that anything's happening at all. The next thing that we need to do is actually get that to count down. To make that simple, we are going to just dump it into the event tick of here. So we'll get the current design. Not equal. Just piece this together very quickly. So if the current design is not none, then that means we have a current design. The event tick has a delta that tells us how long it's been going for, or that's how long in between each tick. The ticks are going to be something like 60 frames a second, so that's going to be fairly small. We probably don't want to adjust the current design remaining time by 1 every tick, but we're just going to do that anyway. Actually, I don't think we need to set it, because I think that, yeah, sets it as well. So every tick, if we're not researching something, we reduce it by 1. And now the final piece to actually get this to all kind of visually work is to update the timer based on that value. Now the set timer image function is called whenever something's ticked, it's set over here. But we're not clicking anything in this case. It just needs to happen. So we can put it in the event click case, I think. Yeah. So we will get the player controller, get the current design. If it's not equal to none, that means we are researching something. We may not have any people yet, that's a different problem, but we are researching something. Then we want to call our function of set timer image. I need to be consistent with my use or not use of spaces in functions, but nonetheless. And we actually want to set that to current remaining time. Oh, we don't want to set. And the modulus of 12 to get the remaining units from 12. Which should give us the clock countdown. Now it's going to be very quick, but it works. And that's obviously just simply taking one away from that value, and it's probably even gone below, or will go below 0. There we go. Now it's broken because it's a 0 number. and 0 modulus 12 is still 0. Maybe even -1 or something, I don't know, but definitely breaks. But the principle is all there. I think for today we're going to stop here. There's obviously lots of bits we can fix, lots of more we can do with this to get it all working, tied up all correctly. We want to account for how many designers you've got. Obviously the research shouldn't happen if you don't have any. The pace of the countdown should be relative to the game speed, not just the tick speed, so we need to account for that. They're the kind of two main things. I think otherwise bits and pieces work correctly. We probably don't want to update the timer image every frame. Again, it's a way of dealing with it, but it's probably better to do that on a more concise point. So because we know that the value's only going to change not every tick of the engine, but more so every tick of the game, we probably want to tie in an event to that at the game state level, or wherever the game logic should go. I don't know if it's the game state or the game mode. I think it's the game state. Because for each given game we have game mode. What else is there? I think it was, yeah, so we've modified the game mode blueprint so that we've got all these. So we've got game session, game class, player state. So it's either in the game mode or it's in the game state. I think it's a game state that would do the game progression. But nonetheless, we'll look more at kind of putting those confinement restrictions in place in the next video tomorrow evening. But I think we've made fairly decent progress on kind of getting this research screen functional. Quite a lot of the kind of key things are in place now. We just need to kind of tie it to the rules that this screen should follow, and we should be able to kind of progress with research fairly soon afterwards. So yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you come by for more, hopefully tomorrow, and good night for now.